One country had never even come close. Not once in the history of the World Cup had a team from that continent reached a semifinal. Then in 2022, Morocco walked into the tournament and beat Belgium, ranked number 2 in the entire world. Then they beat Spain. Then they beat Portugal, a team with Cristiano Ronaldo on it. By the time they were done, Morocco had become the first African nation and the first Arab nation in history to reach a World Cup semifinal. No African team had ever gotten that far. Not Nigeria, not Cameroon, not Senegal, nobody. And they did it with a football budget smaller than what some European clubs spend on a single player. Stick around, because by the end of this video you'll understand exactly how a team nobody feared became a team nobody could beat. Quick basics if you're new to football. The World Cup is like the Super Bowl, except it only happens once every 4 years, and it's not one game. It's 32 countries battling through weeks of matches until only one team is left standing. Reaching the semifinal means you're one of the final 4 teams on the entire planet. Morocco got there. Almost nobody predicted it, including most people in Morocco. Here's the scale of what that means. Morocco is a country in North Africa with a population smaller than California. For decades, their football federation operated on a fraction of the money that countries like England, Germany, or France work with, where individual clubs spend hundreds of millions of dollars on players every single summer. Morocco never had that kind of cash. What they had was patience and a plan that started over a decade before anyone was paying attention. Back in 2009, Morocco's football federation built something called the Mohammed VI Football Academy. Think of it like a specialized sports high school, but only for football. Kids get scouted around age 12, then trained and educated there completely free of charge. At the time, this was rare for African football. Most talented kids had no real option except to leave the continent just to get proper coaching. Morocco decided to build that coaching at home, on their own soil, instead of waiting for Europe to discover their players. Now here's the part that surprises most people. A lot of Morocco's 2022 stars weren't even raised in Morocco. Achraf Hakimi, their star right back, grew up in Madrid, came through Real Madrid's academy, and could have easily played for Spain. Sofiane Amrabat grew up in the Netherlands. Hakim Ziyech also grew up in the Netherlands and actually played for the Dutch youth national teams before switching to Morocco. This is called a diaspora strategy. Morocco went out and recruited talented players of Moroccan descent who were born and raised across Europe and convinced them to represent their family's homeland instead of the countries that developed them. Imagine a college football program recruiting elite athletes with family roots in that state, no matter where in the world those athletes actually grew up. That's essentially what Morocco pulled off, except on a global scale, across an entire continent's diaspora. Let's talk tactics, because this is where the story gets genuinely fascinating. Most casual fans assume good teams win by scoring flashy goals. Morocco proved that assumption wrong. Their coach, Walid Regragui, had only been in the job for a few months before the tournament even started. He wasn't some legendary name. He was a fairly unknown coach who'd mostly worked in domestic Moroccan and French football. And yet he built one of the most disciplined defenses in modern World Cup history. Through 6 matches, Morocco allowed just 1 goal, and that goal wasn't even scored by an opponent. It was an own goal, meaning a Moroccan player accidentally put the ball into his own net. Think about that. 6 games against elite attacking talent, and not one opposing player actually scored past them through open play. A huge part of that defense was their goalkeeper, Yassine Bounou, nicknamed Bono. In the round of 16 against Spain, the match ended scoreless after extra time, which meant it came down to penalty kicks. Bono saved 2 of Spain's penalties. Spain, a former World Cup champion, was eliminated by a country playing in its first ever knockout stage penalty shootout. That single moment sent Morocco into the quarterfinals and sent shockwaves through European football. Then came the game everyone remembers. Portugal, led by Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the most famous athletes alive on the planet. Morocco's defense simply refused to break. A single header in the first half from Youssef and Nassiri was enough. Final score, 1-0. Portugal, a former World Cup finalist stacked with talent, was out. For the first time ever, an African team was standing in a World Cup semifinal. Celebrations didn't just happen in Morocco. They broke out across Europe, in cities like Amsterdam, Brussels, Paris, and Madrid, wherever large Moroccan immigrant communities live. People filled the streets at 2 in the morning, waving flags, honking horns, some of them crying. Here's something most people miss about why this team played the way it did. Morocco's players constantly talked about representing something far bigger than one country. Not just Morocco, but the entire Arab world and the entire African continent. After matches, players would huddle around their mothers on the pitch for photos, a small gesture that went viral worldwide and became one of the most talked about moments of the entire tournament. That's a different kind of pressure and a different kind of motivation, multiplied across hundreds of millions of people who had never watched a team like theirs get this far. Morocco eventually lost to France in the semifinal 2-0. But here's a detail most highlight reels skip entirely. entirely. Morocco was missing two of their starting defenders in that match due to injury and suspension, forced to reshuffle their entire backline against the eventual champions. Sofiane Amrabat, their midfield engine, played much of the tournament with a painful rib injury and barely left the pitch. Morocco followed the France loss by playing Croatia in the third-place match, losing 2-1, and finished fourth in the entire world. Fourth out of every football nation on earth, ahead of countries with 10 times their football budget. So why does this matter beyond just one tournament? Because it changed how the entire sport looks at African talent. European scouts started paying far closer attention to academies across Africa. Other national federations began copying Morocco's diaspora scouting strategy, actively recruiting dual heritage players instead of overlooking them. Transfer values for young Moroccan and North African players noticeably increased in the seasons that followed. Morocco didn't just have one great tournament. They shifted the blueprint for how smaller footballing nations compete. Here's the part that makes this story stick with people. Morocco never lifted the trophy. They never even reached the final. But their run in 2022 might end up being remembered longer than some actual champions, because it proved something bigger than a scoreline. A smaller nation, with a fraction of the resources of football's giants, could out-organize, out-defend, and outwork some of the best teams money could build. Quick recap before we wrap up. Morocco built 3 football academies starting back in 2009. They recruited diaspora talent raised across Europe instead of ignoring it. They built a defense that conceded almost nothing across 6 straight games. And they became the first African and Arab nation in history to reach a World Cup semifinal. Here's the final thought worth keeping. The biggest upsets in sports rarely come from luck. They come from years of quiet planning that nobody was watching, until suddenly, the entire world has no choice but to pay attention. If you learned something new about football today, subscribe, because this channel breaks the sport down for people who never thought they'd understand it, one story at a time.